1888, Oklahoma Territory. Grace Bennett stepped off the stagecoach with her heart in her throat and a letter crumpled in her gloved hand. She had traveled 3 weeks from Boston to become the bride of Caleb Thornton, ranch foreman, who had written such beautiful letters about building a life together on the frontier. The man standing on the porch of the ranch house, however, looked like he wanted to throw her right back on that stagecoach. "I did not send for you," he said, his voice rough as prairie wind. Grace stared at him, her carefully constructed composure crumbling. He was handsome, she would give him that. Tall and broad-shouldered with dark auburn hair that curled slightly at his collar, a short beard that framed a strong jaw, and green eyes that blazed with confusion and anger. He wore work clothes, a tan shirt with the sleeves rolled up over muscular forearms, a dark leather vest, and worn boots. This was supposed to be the man who had written to her about loneliness and hope and new beginnings. "I have your letters," she said, pulling them from her bag with shaking hands. "You asked me to come. You said you needed a wife, that you had a good position here, that you wanted to build a home." He took the letters, his frown deepening as he read. "This is not my handwriting. I never wrote these." The world tilted beneath Grace's feet. She had given up everything. Sold her mother's jewelry to pay for the journey. Left behind the only home she had ever known. And it had all been a lie. "Then who did?" she whispered. Before either could say more, an older man appeared in the doorway. He was in his 60s with silver hair and kind eyes, wearing rancher's clothes that spoke of wealth and good taste. "Caleb, is this the young lady from the stage?" he asked. "Mr. Hartwell, there has been a mistake," Caleb said tightly. "I did not send for a bride." Thomas Hartwell stepped onto the porch, his expression shifting from pleasant to puzzled. "You did not? But I saw the letters. Your handwriting." "It was not my handwriting, sir." Hartwell took the letters, studying them carefully in the fading light. Then his weathered face broke into a smile. "Well now, I believe I know who is behind this. My sister-in-law, Margaret. She has been pestering me for months about you needing a wife, Caleb. About how lonely you are. I should have known she would take matters into her own hands." "She forged letters?" Grace asked, her voice rising. "She made me believe I was wanted here?" "Margaret's heart is in the right place," Hartwell said gently. "But her methods are questionable." "I am very sorry, Miss Bennett. I will of course pay for your return journey to Boston and compensate you for the trouble." Grace looked at the ranch house, at the vast prairies stretching in every direction, at the sunset painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. She thought of Boston, of the tiny room she had rented after her mother died, of the dress shop where she worked 14 hours a day for pennies. She thought of the nothing waiting for her back east. "What if I stayed?" she heard herself say. Both men stared at her. "I mean, not as a bride," she added quickly, her cheeks burning. "But you must need help. Cooking, cleaning, mending. I could work for my keep, just for a little while, until I figure out what to do next." Caleb opened his mouth, clearly about to refuse, but Hartwell spoke first. "That is an excellent idea. My housekeeper quit last month to move to Texas with her daughter. I have been managing poorly on my own. If you are willing to work, Miss Bennett, I would be grateful for the help. And Caleb here lives in the foreman's cabin, so you would have proper distance and propriety." Grace saw the muscle tick in Caleb's jaw. He did not want her here. That was painfully obvious. But she had nowhere else to go, and pride would not let her crawl back to Boston in defeat. "I am a hard worker," she said, lifting her chin. "I will earn my keep." "Then it is settled," Hartwell declared. "Caleb, help Miss Bennett with her bags. I will have Martha show her to the housekeeper's room." Caleb looked like he wanted to argue, but years of working for Hartwell kept him silent. He picked up Grace's bags without a word and carried them into the house, his broad shoulders rigid with displeasure. Grace followed, her heart pounding. What had she just done? That first week was harder than anything Grace had faced in Boston. The ranch house was large and well appointed, but years of bachelor living had left it dusty and disorganized. She cleaned from dawn until dusk, scrubbing floors, washing windows, beating rugs until her arms ached. Hartwell was kind and appreciative, often complimenting her cooking and the improvements she made to his home. Caleb, however, avoided her like she carried plague. She saw him occasionally, coming to the main house to discuss ranch business with Hartwell. He would remove his hat politely when he passed her, nod a curt greeting, and disappear as quickly as possible. He never stayed for meals, never lingered to talk, never gave any indication that he saw her as anything more than an unwanted complication. It should not have bothered her. She had not come here for him after all. The whole thing had been a deception. But at night, alone in her small room, she would reread those beautiful letters and wonder about the woman who had written them. Margaret had captured something true in those words, a loneliness that Grace recognized in herself, a yearning for connection, for home, for someone to build a life with. On her 8th day at the ranch, Grace was in the kitchen, kneading bread, when Caleb appeared in the doorway. She jumped, nearly dropping the dough. "I am sorry," he said gruffly. "I did not mean to startle you." "It is all right." She wiped her flour-covered hands on her apron, suddenly conscious of how she must look. Her hair was escaping its pins, her face flushed from the heat of the stove. "Did you need something?" "Mr. Hartwell asked me to check if you needed anything from town. I am riding in tomorrow." "Oh, that is kind. Let me make a list." She fetched paper and pencil, writing quickly. Flour, sugar, coffee, thread. The ordinary necessities of keeping a household running. When she handed him the list, their fingers brushed for just a moment. She felt the calluses on his hand, the warmth of his skin, and something electric seemed to pass between them. Caleb pulled back as if burned. "I will get these things," he muttered, and turned to leave. "Wait," Grace said, surprising herself. "Mr. Thornton, can I ask you something?" He stopped, but did not turn around. "What is it? Why do you hate me so much?" Now he turned, his green eyes flashing. "I do not hate you. You can barely stand to be in the same room with me. That is not because I hate you." His jaw clenched. "It is because I am angry. At Margaret for her meddling. At myself for not being more careful with my privacy. At the whole damn situation." "I am angry too," Grace said quietly. "I gave up everything to come here. I thought I would have a home, a husband, a future. Instead, I have nothing but charity and a man who flinches every time he sees me." Something in Caleb's expression shifted. "You are not charity. You have earned your place here 3 times over. Hartwell sings your praises constantly. But you still wish I would leave." He was silent for a long moment, studying her with those intense green eyes. "I do not know what I wish," he said finally, his voice rough. "But I know I am sorry. You did not deserve to be deceived. Neither of us did. It was not much, but it was something. A crack in the wall between them." "Thank you," Grace said softly, "for saying that." He nodded once, then left, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. Grace returned to her bread, but her hands were shaking. She told herself it was just relief that he did not actually hate her. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. There was something about Caleb Thornton that drew her. Something in the careful way he moved, the quiet strength in his voice, the loneliness she saw reflected in his eyes. Dangerous thoughts for a woman in her position. The trouble started 2 weeks later. Grace was hanging laundry in the yard when she heard shouting from the direction of the horse pasture. She dropped the wet shirt she was holding and ran toward the sound, her heart pounding. She found Caleb and 3 other ranch hands confronting a group of rough-looking men on horseback. The strangers were armed, their faces hard, their postures threatening. "This land has been claimed," the leader said. He was a big man with a scarred face and cold eyes. "You have 24 hours to clear out. This land belongs to Thomas Hartwell," Caleb said, his voice deadly calm. "Has for 15 years. You have no claim here." "I have papers that say different." The man pulled a document from his saddlebag and waved it mockingly. "Signed by a judge. This land was never properly filed. It is open for claiming, and I am claiming it." "Those papers are fake," Caleb said flatly. "Everyone in the territory knows Hartwell's claim is legitimate." "Then take it up with the judge. Until then, this land is mine, and I suggest you and your men leave before there is trouble." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Grace could see Caleb's hand move toward the gun at his hip, saw the ranch hands tense, ready for a fight. But they were outnumbered, and the strangers looked like men who would shoot first and talk later. "We will see about this," Caleb said. "But you are not moving onto this land until the claim is settled properly." 24 hours, the leader repeated. Then he and his men wheeled their horses and rode off, leaving dust and menace in their wake. Grace hurried forward as the ranch hands began talking urgently among themselves. "What is happening?" she asked Caleb. He looked at her, and she saw real worry in his eyes for the first time. "Claim jumpers. They have been causing trouble all over the territory, finding technicalities in land claims and using them to steal property. Usually they target small homesteads, people who cannot fight back. Going after Hartwell's ranch is bold and dangerous." End quote. "What will you do?" "Ride to the territorial land office in the morning. Check the claim records. Make sure everything is in order. But if they have a corrupt judge backing them..." He trailed off, his expression grim. "Will there be violence? I hope not. But those men were not bluffing. If they think they can take this land, they will try." That night, Grace could not sleep. She lay in her bed, listening to the sounds of the ranch, wondering what would happen. This place had become home to her in the few weeks she had been here. Not just because of the work or Hartwell's kindness, but because of something deeper, a sense of belonging she had never felt in Boston. The thought of men with guns forcing them off this land made her furious. It also terrified her. She rose and wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, then slipped outside onto the porch. The night was cool and clear. Stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. She thought she was alone until she saw the orange glow of a cigarette near the corner of the porch. Could not sleep either? Caleb's voice came from the shadows. She jumped, then moved toward him. I keep thinking about those men, about what might happen. I will handle it, he said. But she heard the tension in his voice. You cannot handle it alone. There were at least 10 of them. I have the ranch hands. And right is on our side. Right does not always win against guns. He was silent for a moment, then flicked his cigarette into the dirt and ground it out with his boot. No, he admitted. It does not always. Grace moved to stand beside him at the porch railing. She could feel the warmth radiating from his body, could smell leather and tobacco and something distinctly him. It made her heart race in a way that had nothing to do with fear of claim jumpers. I am sorry you were caught up in this, Caleb said quietly. You came here expecting one thing and got something completely different. And now, you might be in danger because of other people's greed. I chose to stay, Grace reminded him. Nobody forced me. Why did you stay? The question was soft, but intense. Really? You could have taken Hartwell's money and gone back to Boston, started over somewhere safe. Grace considered her answer carefully. Because there was nothing for me in Boston. My mother died 6 months ago. I had no family, no prospects, just endless days of work and loneliness. When I got those letters, when I thought someone wanted me, needed me, it felt like a door opening. And even though the letters were not real, the need was. Hartwell needed help. This ranch needed someone to care for it. And I needed to feel useful. To feel like I mattered. You matter. His voice was rough. More than you know. Their eyes met in the starlight, and Grace felt her breath catch. The wall between them was crumbling, brick by brick, and she could see the man behind the careful distance he maintained. A man who was lonely, who carried burdens he did not share, who was drawn to her as much as she was drawn to him. Caleb, she whispered. He stepped back abruptly. You should go inside, get some rest. Tomorrow might be difficult. He was right, but Grace felt the loss of the moment like a physical ache. Still, she nodded and went back inside, glancing over her shoulder once to see him standing alone on the porch, his face turned toward the stars. The next morning, Caleb rode out at dawn with 2 ranch hands, headed for the Territorial Land Office. Hartwell paced the house like a caged animal, alternating between fury and worry. Grace tried to keep busy with her work, but she found herself constantly looking out the windows, watching for riders. They did not have to wait long. Around noon, the claim jumpers returned. This time there were more of them, at least 15 men, all armed and looking mean. The leader from yesterday was with them, along with a thin man in a suit who carried a leather case. Grace watched from the kitchen window as Hartwell went out to meet them, flanked by the remaining ranch hands. The numbers were not in their favor, and she could see the tension in every line of Hartwell's body. I am Wesley Kincaid, the thin man announced in a reedy voice. I represent the Territorial Land Office. I am here to inform you that your claim to this land has been found invalid due to improper filing in 1873. The land has been legally claimed by Mr. Pike here. He gestured to the scarred leader. That is a lie, Hartwell said, his voice shaking with rage. I have the original claim documents. Everything was filed properly. Not according to our records. Kincaid pulled papers from his case. You have until sunset to vacate the premises. Any resistance will be met with force and legal consequences. I will not be driven from my own land by thieves and forgers. Pike's hand moved to his gun. You calling me a thief, old man? The moment balanced on a knife edge. Grace could see it happening, could see the violence about to explode. She did the only thing she could think of. She stepped out onto the porch, carrying a tray with coffee and cups. Gentlemen, she called out, her voice bright and cheerful despite her pounding heart. This seems like the kind of discussion that could benefit from refreshment. I have fresh coffee and apple pie in the kitchen. Why do we not all sit down like civilized people and sort this out properly? Every man turned to stare at her. Pike's hand dropped away from his gun, confusion replacing the violence in his expression. Kincaid looked annoyed. Hartwell looked grateful. I do not think pie is going to solve this, lady, Pike said. Perhaps not, Grace agreed, setting the tray on the porch rail. But shooting people will not solve it either. And I make excellent pie, my mother's recipe. Despite everything, several of the men actually smiled. Grace seized the moment. Mr. Kincaid, you mentioned records from 1873. Could I see them, please? I am rather good with paperwork, and perhaps I can help identify where the confusion lies. Kincaid hesitated, clearly not expecting a woman to involve herself in business matters. But Grace's calm competence seemed to throw him off balance. He handed over the papers with obvious reluctance. Grace studied them carefully, her heart sinking. They looked official. Stamps, signatures, everything seemingly in order. But something about them felt wrong. The paper was too new. The ink too fresh. These documents had not sat in a dusty office for 15 years. These papers are dated 1873, she said slowly. But the ink is recent, no more than a few weeks old. You can still smell the chemicals used in the printing process. Kincaid's face went red. You do not know what you are talking about. I worked in a print shop in Boston for 2 years, Grace said calmly. I know exactly what I am talking about. These are forgeries. That is slander! That is truth. Grace met his eyes steadily. And if you push this claim, Mr. Kincaid, I will testify to it in front of a judge. A real judge, not whoever you bribed to sign these papers. The silence that followed was deafening. Pike stared at Grace, then at Kincaid, his expression darkening. You said these papers were legitimate, Pike growled. They are, Kincaid insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. I think you should leave now, Hartwell said quietly, before I send for the territorial marshal to investigate fraud and attempted theft. Pike's jaw worked, his hand moving back toward his gun. But now the ranch hands had their weapons drawn, and the situation had shifted. Grace's revelation had undermined Kincaid's authority, and without the legal cover, Pike was just a common criminal. This is not over, Pike snarled. But he wheeled his horse and gestured for his men to follow. They rode off in a cloud of dust and curses, Kincaid scrambling to mount up and flee with them. As soon as they were out of sight, Grace's knees nearly gave out. Hartwell caught her elbow, steadying her. "That was the bravest thing I have ever seen," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "And the smartest. You may have just saved this ranch." "I just bought us time," Grace said. "They will be back. Men like that do not give up easily. Then we will be ready." Caleb rode in an hour later with documents from the land office proving that Hartwell's claim was legitimate and properly filed. But the victory felt hollow. The claim jumpers now knew the ranch would fight back, and men like Pike did not take humiliation lightly. That night, Caleb found Grace on the porch again, staring out at the dark prairie. "You should not have put yourself in danger like that," he said without preamble. Grace turned to face him. Someone had to do something. Those men were going to start shooting. It was not your responsibility. This is my home now. That makes it my responsibility. Caleb moved closer, his expression intense in the lantern light spilling from the house. "Grace, these men are dangerous. If they come back, they will not be so easily deterred." "I know." She met his eyes. "But I am not leaving, not unless you tell me I have to." "I would never tell you that." His voice was low, rough. I cannot lose anyone else. Do you understand? I cannot." The raw pain in his words hit Grace like a physical blow. "Who did you lose?" He was silent for a long moment, his jaw tight. Then, finally, he spoke. "My wife, Sarah. She died 3 years ago, giving birth to our son. The baby died with her. I buried them both in one grave, and I swore I would never care about anyone again. Never let anyone close enough to hurt me like that." Grace's throat tightened with unshed tears. "I am so sorry, Caleb. That is why Margaret wrote those letters. She thought I needed someone, that I had been alone too long. She was probably right. But knowing that and being able to let someone in are two different things." "I understand." Grace touched his arm gently. "My mother died suddenly. One day she was fine. The next, she was gone. I felt so lost, so alone. I know what it is like to be afraid of caring again." Caleb's hand covered hers on his arm. The touch was warm, solid, real. "But you are still trying, still letting yourself care. Because the alternative is worse. Being safe and alone, or taking a chance and maybe finding happiness. I would rather risk the hurt. You are braver than I am. Or more foolish." He smiled. The first real smile she had seen from him. It transformed his face, made him look younger, less burdened. Maybe both. They stood there on the porch, hands touching, something precious and fragile building between them. Grace knew this was a turning point. Whatever happened next would change everything. "I am glad you stayed," Caleb said softly. "Even though I fought it, even though I tried to keep my distance, I am glad you are here. So am I." He lifted his hand and cupped her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. The touch was gentle, reverent, and it made Grace's heart skip. "I do not know what comes next," he admitted, "but I know I do not want to face it without you. You will not have to." He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. She did not want to. When his lips met hers, it was soft and careful, a question more than a demand. Grace answered by rising on her toes and kissing him back, her hand moving to his chest, where she could feel his heart pounding as fast as her own. The kiss deepened, and Grace felt heat flood through her. His hand slid into her hair. The other pressed against the small of her back, pulling her closer. She had never been kissed like this. Never felt this combination of desire and tenderness and rightness. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "Grace," Caleb whispered against her forehead, "I am falling in love with you. I tried not to, but I cannot help it." "Good," she said, smiling through tears, "because I am falling in love with you too." The following days were tense. Pike and his men did not return immediately, but everyone on the ranch knew it was only a matter of time. Caleb organized watches, made sure everyone was armed, and sent word to neighboring ranches asking for help if trouble came. Through it all, Grace and Caleb grew closer. He came to the main house for meals now, lingering to talk with her after Hartwell retired for the evening. They spoke of everything: his childhood in Texas, her life in Boston, their dreams and fears, and the strange path that had brought them together. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Margaret had not written those letters?" Grace asked one evening as they sat together on the porch steps. "Every day," Caleb admitted. "Part of me is still angry at her for the deception. But another part is grateful. I would never have let myself court you properly. I was too locked in grief, too determined to stay alone. And now?" He took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "Now I cannot imagine my life without you in it. That terrifies me and thrills me in equal measure." "I feel the same way." Grace leaned her head on his shoulder. "When I got on that stagecoach in Boston, I thought I was heading toward one future. Instead, I found something better. Something real. Real and complicated," Caleb said with a rueful smile. "We still have to deal with Pike and his claim jumpers. And even after that, people will talk. A former mail-order bride who was not actually ordered, with the ranch foreman. It is not exactly conventional. I have never been conventional." "Neither have I." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Grace knew he was right about the complications ahead, but she also knew they would face them together, and that made all the difference. The attack came a week later, in the middle of the night. Grace woke to shouting and the sound of gunfire. She threw on her robe and rushed to the window to see flames engulfing the barn. Men on horseback circled the ranch house, firing shots into the air, creating chaos and terror. She ran downstairs to find Hartwell already there, rifle in hand. "Stay inside," he ordered. "Lock the doors. Do not come out no matter what happens." But Grace could see Caleb and the ranch hands fighting back, outnumbered and in danger. She could not just hide while the people she cared about might die. She grabbed the shotgun Hartwell kept in the kitchen, checked that it was loaded, and slipped out the back door while Hartwell was focused on the front. She made her way toward the barn, staying low, using the darkness and smoke for cover. She found Caleb pinned down behind a water trough, returning fire at 3 men who had him in a crossfire. Without thinking, Grace raised the shotgun and fired at the nearest attacker. The shot went wide, but it was enough to make the man dive for cover and give Caleb a chance to move to better position. "Grace, what are you doing?" Caleb shouted over the gunfire. "Helping!"
"You are going to get yourself killed!"
"Not if you protect me!" Despite everything, he laughed. Then his expression went hard and focused. Stay behind me. Do not do anything else foolish." They fought their way back toward the house, providing covering fire for the ranch hands who were trying to save the barn. But the flames were too intense, the heat driving everyone back. Grace could only watch as the structure collapsed in a shower of sparks, taking hay and tack and tools with it. Then, suddenly, more riders appeared. But these were not claim jumpers. These were ranchers from neighboring properties, drawn by the smoke and gunfire, coming to help. With reinforcements, the tide turned quickly. Pike and his men fled into the darkness, leaving destruction but not victory behind. In the aftermath, as men worked to contain the flames and assess the damage, Grace found Caleb checking the wounded. 2 ranch hands had minor injuries, but everyone had survived. The barn was a total loss, but it could be rebuilt. "You could have been killed," Caleb said when he finally came to her. His face was streaked with soot, his shirt torn, but his eyes blazed with emotion. "So could you?" Grace countered. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "Do not ever do something like that again. When I saw you out there with that shotgun, my heart nearly stopped. I could not let you face them alone. I was not alone. I had the ranch hands. And now you have me too. For better or worse." He pulled back to look at her face, his thumb tracing her jaw. "Is that a proposal, Miss Bennett?" Grace felt her breath catch. "Would you accept if it were?" "I would marry you tonight if I could." His voice was rough with emotion. "But I want to do this right. Court you properly. Give you time to be sure. You deserve that." "I am already sure," Grace said. "I have been sure since the night you told me about Sarah, since you let me see your heart." Caleb kissed her then, deep and desperate. A kiss that tasted of smoke and promise, and forever. When they broke apart, both were shaking. "Marry me," he said. "Not because of Margaret's letters or Hartwell's kindness or any other reason except that I love you. That I want to build a life with you, have a family with you, grow old with you." "Yes," Grace whispered. Yes to all of it. The weeks that followed were busy with rebuilding and preparation. Pike had been arrested trying to flee the territory, and Kincaid had confessed to the forgery scheme in exchange for a lighter sentence. The threat was over, and the ranch could begin to heal. Grace and Caleb's engagement was announced, and to Grace's surprise, the community welcomed the news warmly. Apparently, the story of the mail-order bride who never was had become local legend, and people respected the unconventional path that had led to their love. Margaret Hartwell arrived a week before the wedding, full of apologies and delight in equal measure. "I know I should not have done it," she said to Grace over tea. "The deception was wrong. But when I met you at the stagecoach station, when I saw the woman my letters had brought here, I knew. I just knew you were meant for Caleb." "You met me?" Grace asked, confused. "I was the woman who helped you with your bags, who told you how to find the Hartwell Ranch. I wanted to see you for myself, to make sure you were suitable. And the moment I saw your face, your determination despite your fear, I knew my meddling would work out." Grace did not know whether to laugh or be outraged. In the end, she chose laughter. "You are a wicked woman, Margaret Hartwell." "I know," Margaret agreed cheerfully. "But I am a wicked woman who brought you and Caleb together. So perhaps you can forgive me?" "I suppose I must," Grace said with a smile, "since I am about to marry the man I love, because of your scheming." The wedding took place on a crisp fall morning, with the entire community gathered at the small church in town. Grace wore a simple dress of cream silk that Margaret had insisted on buying for her. Caleb wore his best suit, looking handsome and nervous, and so full of love that Grace's heart could barely contain it. When the preacher asked if she would take this man as her husband, Grace's voice rang out clear and certain. "I will." And when Caleb slipped the ring on her finger and kissed her as his wife for the first time, Grace knew she had found what she had been searching for all along. Not just love, but home. Not just partnership, but belonging. Not just survival, but joy. The reception was held at the ranch, in the newly rebuilt barn that smelled of fresh wood and hay. Neighbors brought food and music, and the celebration lasted long into the evening. Grace danced with Caleb under strings of lanterns, surrounded by people who had become family, in the place that had become home. "Are you happy?" Caleb asked, pulling her close as they swayed to the fiddle music. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Grace said honestly. "When I stepped off that stagecoach 3 months ago, I was terrified and angry and lost. Now I have everything I ever wanted." "So do I." He kissed her forehead. "Thank you for staying, for taking a chance on me, on us, on this life." "Thank you for letting me in," Grace replied, "for being brave enough to love again." As the evening wore on and the stars came out, Caleb and Grace slipped away from the party, walking hand in hand toward the foreman's cabin that was now their home. Tomorrow, they would begin their married life together, building the future they had both dreamed of. But tonight, this moment, was perfect, just as it was. The first weeks of marriage were an adjustment. Caleb's cabin was small, meant for one person, and sharing the space required compromise and patience. But Grace loved every moment of it. She loved waking up in his arms, loved cooking breakfast together in the tiny kitchen, loved the quiet evenings by the fire when they would talk, or read, or simply sit in comfortable silence. She also loved watching Caleb transform. The guarded, lonely man she had first met was gone, replaced by someone lighter, more open, more at peace. He smiled more, laughed more, touched her constantly as if reassuring himself she was real. "I did not realize how much I was just going through the motions until you came along," he told her one morning, as they lay in bed watching the sun rise through the window. "I was alive, but not living. Now I feel like every day matters, like there is something to look forward to." "I feel the same way," Grace said, tracing patterns on his chest. "In Boston, I was so lonely. I would go days without anyone speaking to me beyond what was necessary for work. Here, I have you. I have Hartwell. I have the community. I have a life that means something." Winter came early that year, bringing snow and cold winds that howled across the prairie. The ranch slowed its pace, and Grace and Caleb spent long evenings in their cabin, warm and safe while the world outside froze. It was during one of those evenings that Grace realized she might be pregnant. She was not certain yet, but her body felt different, and she had missed her monthly courses. The possibility filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. She knew how much Caleb wanted children, but she also knew how much Sarah's death had scarred him. The thought of pregnancy might bring back painful memories. She decided to wait to tell him until she was sure. But Caleb noticed the change in her before she could confirm it. He found her one morning staring at herself in the mirror, her hand pressed to her still flat stomach, tears in her eyes. "Grace?" His voice was gentle. "What is wrong?" She turned to him, seeing the concern in his face, and knew she could not keep this from him. "I think I might be with child. I am not certain yet, but the signs are there." She watched fear flash across his face, followed by something else. Something that looked like hope, struggling against old pain. "How do you feel about that?" he asked carefully. "Terrified," Grace admitted. "And happy. And worried about you. I know this must bring back difficult memories." Caleb crossed to her and took her hands. "It does. I cannot lie about that. When Sarah told me she was pregnant, I was so happy. And then I lost them both, and that happiness turned to ash. But Grace, you are not Sarah. This is not that time. And I refuse to let fear steal our joy." "You are not afraid?" "I am terrified," he said honestly. "But I am also hopeful. We will face this together. If you are pregnant, we will have a child to love. And if anything goes wrong, we will survive it together. I am not the same man I was 3 years ago. You have made me stronger." Grace felt tears spill down her cheeks. "I love you so much." "I love you too." He pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "Whatever comes, we face it together. That is what marriage means. That is what love means." 2 weeks later, the doctor confirmed what Grace had suspected. She was pregnant, due in late summer. When she told Caleb, he lifted her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. Then he set her down carefully, his face suddenly serious. "I am going to take such good care of you," he promised. "You and our child. You will want for nothing." "I only want you," Grace said. "That is all I have ever needed." Spring brought new life to the ranch in more ways than one. The cattle thrived, the crops grew, and Grace's pregnancy progressed smoothly. She bloomed under Caleb's constant care and attention, feeling more beautiful and cherished than she ever had in her life. Hartwell was delighted at the prospect of a child on the ranch. He had a cradle built by the best carpenter in the territory, and presented it to them with such pride that Grace cried. Margaret visited often, bringing baby clothes she had sewn and advice about motherhood that was actually helpful, despite her meddling nature. As Grace's belly grew round and full, Caleb became both more protective and more tender. He would not let her lift anything heavy, insisted she rest often, and spent his evenings with his hand on her stomach, feeling their child move and kick. "She is strong," he said one evening, feeling a particularly vigorous kick. "He is strong," Grace corrected with a smile. "She," Caleb insisted. "I want a daughter with your eyes and your courage. And I want a son with your strength and your kind heart. Then perhaps we will have both, eventually." The thought of more children, of a house full of love and laughter, made Grace's heart swell. This was the life she had dreamed of in those lonely nights in Boston. This was the home she had been searching for. Summer arrived hot and dry, and Grace grew uncomfortable in the heat. Her back ached, her feet swelled, and she had trouble sleeping. But Caleb was endlessly patient, rubbing her back, fetching her water, sitting up with her when the baby kicked too hard for her to rest. "You are going to be such a good father," Grace told him one night as he massaged her swollen feet. "I am going to try," he said. I want to give our child everything. Love, security, a home where they know they are wanted and cherished. They will have all of that, because they will have you. The labor started on a hot August afternoon. Grace was hanging laundry when the first pain hit, sharp and unmistakable. She gripped the clothesline, breathing through the contraction, then called for Caleb. He came running from the barn, took one look at her face, and swept her up into his arms. "The baby is coming?" "The baby is coming," Grace confirmed. The next hours were the longest of Caleb's life. He paced outside the cabin while the midwife and Margaret tended to Grace, listening to her cries and feeling completely helpless. Every scream reminded him of Sarah, of the day he lost everything. He prayed harder than he had ever prayed, bargaining with God for Grace's safety and the baby's health. Finally, as the sun was setting, he heard a new sound. A baby's cry, thin and strong and alive. The cabin door opened, and Margaret appeared, tears streaming down her face. "You have a son, Caleb. A healthy, beautiful son. And Grace is fine. She is tired, but fine. They are both fine." Caleb felt his knees go weak with relief. He stumbled into the cabin to find Grace propped up in bed, exhausted and glowing, holding a small bundle wrapped in a blanket. When she looked up at him, her smile was radiant. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Caleb crossed to the bed on shaking legs and looked down at the tiny face peeking out from the blanket. The baby had Grace's blue eyes and a shock of dark hair. He was perfect. "He is beautiful," Caleb whispered, his voice breaking. "You are both beautiful. Do you want to hold him?" Caleb took his son carefully, cradling the small weight against his chest. The baby stared up at him with unfocused eyes, one tiny fist waving in the air. In that moment, Caleb felt his heart crack wide open. All the fear and pain from the past dissolved, replaced by overwhelming love. "Hello, little one," he said, tears running down his face. "I am your papa, and I am going to love you and protect you every day of your life." Grace watched her husband hold their child and felt such complete happiness that she thought she might burst with it. This was her family. This was her home. This was everything she had ever wanted, and more than she had ever dared to hope for. The days after the birth were a blur of feeding and sleeping and learning how to be parents. The baby, whom they named Thomas after Hartwell, was a good baby, only fussing when he was hungry or needed changing. Caleb proved to be a natural father, patient and gentle, completely devoted to his son. Grace watched him walk the floor with Thomas at night, singing softly to soothe the baby back to sleep, and fell even more deeply in love with her husband. This was the man Margaret had seen in those letters, the man who had been hidden under layers of grief and fear. He had always been there, waiting for someone to help him heal. "Thank you," Caleb said to her one morning, as they sat together watching Thomas sleep in his cradle. "For taking a chance on me, for loving me when I was not sure I could love again, for giving me this family." "Thank you for letting me in," Grace replied, "for being brave enough to try again, for building this life with me." He kissed her softly, then turned back to watch their son. "Do you ever think about that day you arrived, when I told you I had not sent for you?" "All the time," Grace admitted. "I was so angry and hurt and confused. I thought my life was over. Instead, it was just beginning. For both of us. As summer faded into fall, the ranch settled into new rhythms. Grace managed the household and cared for Thomas, while Caleb worked the land. They had dinner together every evening as a family, and spent quiet evenings by the fire, Thomas sleeping between them while they talked and planned for the future. Hartwell doted on his namesake, visiting often with small gifts and stories. Margaret remained a constant presence, full of advice and affection. The community embraced the young family, bringing food and clothes and offers of help. Grace had never felt so surrounded by love, so completely at home. The lonely girl from Boston seemed like a different person, someone from another life. She was Grace Thornton now, wife and mother, part of a family and a community. She belonged. One evening in October, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset with Thomas sleeping in Grace's arms, Caleb turned to her with a serious expression. "I have been thinking," he said, "about expanding, building a bigger house, running more cattle, making this into something we can pass down to Thomas and any other children we might have." "Other children?" Grace asked with a smile. "If you want them. I know it is too soon to think about it now, but someday. I want a big family, Grace. I want this place full of love and laughter and life." "So do I," Grace said. "I want Thomas to have siblings, to never feel alone the way I did. I want to build something lasting here." "Then we will." Caleb took her hand. "Together, we can do anything." Grace looked out at the prairie, at the ranch that had become home, at the life they had built from nothing but determination and love. She thought about the letters that had brought her here, the deception that had led to truth, the loneliness that had become belonging. "I am glad Margaret wrote those letters," she said softly. "Even though they were fake, even though it started with a lie, I am glad. Because they brought me to you." "I am glad too," Caleb agreed. "I spent 3 years wishing I could go back, wishing I could change what happened. But I do not wish that anymore. Because if I could change the past, I might lose the future. And this future, with you and Thomas, is worth everything that came before." Winter came again, and with it the first real test of their new family. Thomas developed a fever that had Grace and Caleb terrified, memories of Sarah's death haunting them both. But the doctor came and treated the baby, and within a few days Thomas was back to his healthy, happy self. The scare brought them even closer together. They realized how precious their time was, how quickly things could change. They made the most of every moment, treasuring the ordinary days as much as the special ones. Spring brought renewal to the ranch. Caleb hired more men and expanded the herd as planned. Grace worked with Hartwell to improve the main house and began planning the larger home Caleb had promised to build for their growing family. Thomas was walking now, toddling around the cabin on chubby legs, getting into everything and bringing joy wherever he went. On a warm April afternoon, Grace was in the garden planting vegetables when she felt a familiar flutter in her stomach. She stood up slowly, her hand going to her belly, a smile spreading across her face. She was pregnant again. This time there was no fear, only joy. She and Caleb had proven they could survive anything together. Another child was not a threat, but a blessing. Another chance to love. Another piece of the family they were building. She found Caleb in the barn, repairing a saddle, and took his hand without a word. She placed it on her stomach and watched his face as understanding dawned. "All ready?" he asked, his voice full of wonder. "All ready," Grace confirmed. He pulled her into his arms and spun her around, laughing. Then he set her down carefully and kissed her with such tenderness that Grace felt tears spring to her eyes. "I love you," he said against her lips. "I love our life. I love everything we have built together." "I love you too," Grace replied, more than words can say. That evening, they sat on the porch with Thomas between them, watching the sun set over the prairie. The sky was painted in shades of amber and rose and gold, and the air smelled of grass and earth and growing things. "Tell me again how we met," Thomas demanded, even though he was too young to really understand the story. Grace and Caleb exchanged a smile. "Well," Grace began, "I came here on a stagecoach, thinking I was going to marry your papa. But when I arrived, he told me he had never sent for me at all. And I was very angry," Caleb continued, tickling Thomas until the boy giggled. "I did not want a wife. I thought I wanted to be alone forever." "But your Aunt Margaret had other ideas," Grace said. "She wrote letters pretending to be your papa, and those letters brought me here. And even though I was angry, even though I tried to stay away, your mama was too brave and too beautiful for me to resist," Caleb finished. "So, I fell in love with her. And then we got married. And then you were born. And now we are a family." "Tell again," Thomas insisted, as children do. So they told the story again, and then again, as the stars came out and the night grew cool. It was a story they would tell many times over the years, to Thomas and to the daughter who would be born that winter, and to the other children who would follow. It would become part of the family legend, the tale of the mail-order bride who was not really ordered, and the lonely ranch foreman who learned to love again. But for now, it was just the three of them on the porch, with another child on the way, in the home they had built together. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The months passed in a rhythm of work and love and family. Grace's pregnancy progressed smoothly, her body knowing what to do this time, her fears quieted by experience. Caleb was attentive, but not smothering, trusting her strength while standing ready to help whenever she needed him. Thomas was excited about the prospect of a sibling, though he did not fully understand what it meant. He would pat Grace's growing belly and talk to the baby, telling stories in his childish way about the ranch and the animals and his papa. Hartwell began construction on the new house in late summer, a larger structure with proper bedrooms and a real kitchen and a parlor for entertaining. It was being built just beyond the foreman's cabin, close enough to feel connected, but far enough to give the growing family space. "This is your legacy," Hartwell told Caleb as they stood surveying the construction. "When I am gone, this ranch will be yours and Grace's. You have earned it through your loyalty and your hard work. I want to see you and your family thrive here." Caleb was humbled by the offer. "Sir, I do not know what to say. Say you will accept. Say you will make this place prosper. Say you will fill that new house with children and laughter and love." "We will," Caleb promised. "I swear it." When he told Grace that evening, she wept with joy. The ranch would be theirs, their children's inheritance, a home for generations to come. Everything they had hoped for was coming true. The baby arrived in early December, during a light snowfall that made the world look clean and new. This time, the labor was shorter, and Grace was calmer, knowing what to expect. When the midwife placed their daughter in her arms, Grace felt a sense of completion. Their family was whole. Caleb sat beside her on the bed, Thomas on his lap, all of them gazing at the tiny girl with her father's auburn hair and her mother's delicate features. "What should we name her?" Grace asked. "Sarah," Caleb said quietly. "If you are comfortable with that, I want to honor her memory while celebrating this new life." Grace understood. Sarah Thornton I had been lost, but Sarah Thornton II would be loved and cherished. It was a way of making peace with the past while embracing the future. "Sarah Elizabeth," Grace said, adding her mother's name, "for both the women we lost and the life we found." They spent that Christmas in their new house, the first holiday in their permanent home. The rooms were still mostly empty, but there was a fire in the hearth and a tree in the parlor, and love filling every corner. Hartwell joined them for dinner, along with Margaret and several neighbors who had become dear friends. As Grace looked around the table at the faces of the people who had become family, at her husband and children, at the home they had built, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. She thought about the girl who had stepped off that stagecoach 16 months ago, scared and angry and lost. That girl had been brave enough to stay, to try, to love. And look what that bravery had brought her. After dinner, when the guests had gone home and the children were asleep, Grace and Caleb stood together at the parlor window, looking out at the snow-covered prairie. "Are you happy?" Caleb asked, as he had so many times before. "Happier than I have words for," Grace replied honestly. "Sometimes I wake up and I cannot believe this is my life, that I get to live here with you, raise our children here, grow old here. It feels like a dream." "It is real," Caleb assured her, pulling her close. "All of it. The ranch, the family, the love. It is ours, and it is real, and it is just the beginning." "The beginning of what?" "Everything. Our life together. All the years ahead. All the moments we will share. All the memories we will make." Grace leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart. She thought about the future stretching before them, full of possibility and promise. There would be challenges, certainly. Hard winters and dry summers, and the constant work of running a ranch. But they would face it all together, stronger as a pair than they ever could have been alone. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly. "The way we came together? The deception that started it all?" "Never," Caleb said firmly. "I regret the pain it caused you at first, the confusion and hurt. But I do not regret where it led us. Sometimes, I think Margaret understood something we could not see. That we needed each other, that we were meant to find each other, even if it took a little meddling to make it happen. She says the same thing, that she knew the moment she met me that I was meant for you." She was right. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the snow fall, the world peaceful and still around them. Inside the house, their children slept safely in their beds. The fire crackled warmly in the hearth. The future waited, full of hope and possibility. This was home. This was family. This was love. And it was more than enough. It was everything they had ever needed, everything they had ever wanted, everything they would ever dream of. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the sun reflecting off the new snow in blinding brilliance. Grace woke early to feed baby Sarah and found Caleb already up, standing at the bedroom window. "Could not sleep?" she asked softly, so as not to wake Thomas in the next room. "I slept," Caleb said, turning to smile at her. "I just wanted to watch the sunrise. The first one in our new house." Grace joined him at the window, Sarah nestled in her arms. Together they watched the sky lighten from deep blue to pink to gold, the prairie transforming from shadow to light. "It is beautiful," Grace whispered. "You are beautiful," Caleb corrected, kissing her temple. "You and our children. This life we have built, that is what is beautiful." They spent the morning slowly, luxuriating in the quiet before the day's work began. Caleb made coffee while Grace nursed the baby. Thomas woke demanding breakfast and stories. They ate together at the new kitchen table, the winter sun streaming through the windows, warming the room. After breakfast, Caleb bundled up to check on the cattle, while Grace tended to the house and children. But before he left, he pulled her into his arms for a long kiss. "I love you," he said against her lips. "Every day, I love you more." "I love you too," Grace replied. "Now go take care of the ranch. Your family is waiting for you to come home." "Always," Caleb promised. "I will always come home to you." Grace watched him ride out toward the pastures, his figure strong and capable against the white landscape. She thought about how far they had both come, from loneliness to love, from loss to healing, from strangers to soulmates. The days settled into their natural rhythm. Caleb worked the ranch with quiet competence, building the legacy Hartwell had promised. Grace managed their home and raised their children with strength and grace. Together they made decisions, solved problems, celebrated victories, and weathered setbacks. On cold January evenings, they would sit by the fire after the children were asleep, talking about their plans for the ranch, for their family, for their future. They spoke of adding more rooms as more children came, of teaching Thomas to ride and rope, of the gardens Grace wanted to plant in spring. "We are building something that will last," Caleb said one night, his arm around Grace as they watched the flames dance. "Something our children and grandchildren will inherit. A home built on love." "That is all I ever wanted," Grace said softly. "A place to belong, people to love, a purpose that matters. You have all of that. We both do." Grace smiled, feeling Sarah's weight against her chest as the baby slept, hearing Thomas's soft breathing from the bedroom. "Yes, we do." Outside, the prairie stretched vast and beautiful under the winter stars. Inside, the fire burned warm and steady. And in that moment, Grace knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The mail-order bride, who was never really ordered, had found her home. The lonely ranch foreman had found his heart again. And together, they had built a love that would endure through all the seasons to come. This was love. This was home. This was forever.